the minorities, the theodiversity in the other side of the fence is protected in India because theodiversity is the basis of this side of the fence. So here you have a model where completely different darshanas can coexist because of theodiversity. Somehow we have accommodated it, and we are very sure that this should not be destroyed, because in Bhumi Sukta and Atharva Veda, very specifically 3 diversities are mentioned. One is the ethnic diversity of people, linguistic diversity of people, theodiversity of people. Yeah. The problem with conversion is that when you plan and when you execute a conversion, then it becomes a war. As you know, in an ecosystem, if a particular species is going to take over the entire ecosystem, then it is an invasive species. It is destroying the ecosystem completely. Akhand Bharatam, as visualized by the ideologues of Hindutva, or the people who are Hindutvites in the post-independent period, naturally, like Pandit Dindayal Upadhyaya to Babasaheb Devaras, they have visualized actually a cultural, economic, cooperating network. We have told it very clearly. Akhand Bharatam is not a military expansionist fantasy. They were the first people to talk about creating a cooperation among the people of Pakistan, Bangladesh, India, Nepal, Burma, Sri Lanka, all this together. We should, because we ultimately we live in the same eco-cultural zone. So we belong to the same stock. We have to come together. Our problems are going to be the same. When there is going to be global climate change and sea levels rising, the problem of Bangladesh is also the problem of India. So ultimately we should have a kind of cooperation. And when the SARC movement was started, Balasaheb Devarasji was actually very happy, because this is a right step towards Akhand Bharatam. These people had strong faith in humanity.
Namaste.
Namaste, Professor.
It's really a very pleasure to have this conversation with you, and it's my good fortune that I get to talk to you on the august occasion of your book release in Ahmedabad, and particularly this Indus University. So I am doubly blessed, in fact, to be in conversing you and picking your brain about your wonderful book, as well as to be in this wonderful place. As you can see, this is a very voluminous work that indeed you have carried out. And I believe this must be the fruit of labor of not just 1 year, multiple years. But what really picks me is the person to whom you have dedicated this book right in the beginning, Swami Madhuranand Guru Maharaj. So let's start. I would like to know more about this venerated Guruji to whom you have dedicated the book for.
And Sri Madhuranand Guru Maharaj was the person who actually initiated my writing, as in Vidyarambha. So it was he who made me write my first alphabet. And he was the founder of this Hindu Vidya Peetham in Kanyakumari district, where children on Sundays, Hindu children would come and they would be learning about the fundamentals of Hindu Dharma. And this became a movement, and it stopped conversions in a very big way. Today, if in Kanyakumari district there is a very self-respecting, strong Hindu population that is culturally, politically and spiritually aware of its heritage, then that is because of Swami Madhuranand Maharaj. And 2023 is the 101st birth anniversary of Swamiji, so I thought I would dedicate the book to him, who was actually my guru.
So is there any kind of state recognition of this Swamiji in your district? Or
To my knowledge, no.
That's also one of the unfortunate part.
It is very unfortunate, because actually the model that he created for Kanyakumari district can be scaled up for entire Tamil Nadu. And as you know, Tamil Nadu today is in a very crucial situation, and had that been done, then we would have stopped conversions. More importantly, we would have become aware of our spiritual heritage, which is good for entire humanity, cutting across religions.
Stopping conversion could be one aspect of it, which was the aspect what this Guruji had done. But with this brief introduction that you say, what it also appears to me that this would have been also a signature statement to say, fine, education was now opened up for everybody, which was a tradition also and which this Guruji had continued, which our detractors would like to believe that no, it was only secluded to a specific community or a group. I mean, a person like him is also a very good example to show now how education is kind of given to one and all.
Very much true. Because the students graduate from Hindu Dharma Vidyapeetham, they actually do not have any state or academic recognitions. But they come and they, out of their own money, they come and they write the examination. And they get this title called Vidya Jyoti. After they get this title of Vidya Jyoti, they are asked by families to come and officiate sometimes marriages. Sometimes when they are mourning, they ask them to come and do a prayer in their, it is called Atma Santi Mantra. They come and do that prayer in their houses. So by doing this, what they have done is they have created a network that taps into the richness of Hindu Dharma for sustaining people during their family or their individual life cycle events. And this has been very successful, so successful that from Sri Lanka, just before the civil wars, they used to ask these Vidya Jyoti students to come there and help the families to tide over their trauma. So that much he has done contribution. Unfortunately, as I said, you rightly pointed out, there has been no recognition. I hope there will be a recognition because of
But I guess this dedicating this book and by a person like you itself is one of the greatest
it is the
tribute.
smallest thing that I can do to his sacred memory. Because he was such a great person who never projected himself. He just lived within a small ashram and he changed the lives of millions of people and saved Kanyakumari district from a civilisational death.
With that start, I mean, there are various aspects that you have nicely covered in this book, in particularly 8 chapters, where the first chapter you begin it from the origins, the Hindutva. So there has been a lot of discourse now in the public domain, how Hindutva is very different from Hinduism and how it is different from ritualistic aspects of Hindu, and how the political ideology of just tapping to the emotional aspect of the so-called majoritarian population here, that is the aspect of Hindutva. That is Hindutva is what is being projected out in the media. Now, quickly, I would like to listen from you about when you say origins of the Hindutva, is it the concept or is it that word Hindutva? What is it that you have to have?
Veer Savarkar discovered Hindutva. He discovered it. Actually, some 15 years before Veer Savarkar, when he was in the jail probably, Rabindranath Tagore used the term Hindutva also. He also discovered it. And these two people discovered it independently. And they discovered Hindutva as a process. The process of history, process of civilizational flow, and also here, in zeroing in at the origins, it is a process of the expansion of consciousness. Okay? And so, what we see here, Hindutva, is that it is not a political ideology. It is dimensions in politics. It is not a social discourse. It has dimensions in society and in the social narrative. And it is not a religious dogma, but it reflects itself in various religious sampradayas that have been born in this nation. And it is the unifying aspect, the unifying substratum of the different darshanas that have came from this land. And that way, we start with the very basic aspect of consciousness discovering itself in a very beautiful way in humanity's evolution during the so-called axial age. And the book discusses when actually the axial age came to India. It came to India a bit before the other.
Sorry to interrupt here. I mean, just for my understanding as well as for understanding of the listeners, Can you dwell deeper on this axial age?
Okay. Axial age is something that a section of historians and anthropologists, they think that there was a renaissance of religious ideas and doctrines during a particular stage in human history, during the beginning of, let us say, the around 700 BC, around, there was Buddha in India, and there was Zarathustra, and there was Moses, and so this kind of a renaissance was happening. That was axial age, when actually the religious doctrines became important. Okay, Julian Jaynes, who was an American psychologist, he made a very interesting contribution to this discourse, and when he said that the bicameral mind that found itself divided into two distinct aspects, though connected by corpus callosum, they finally got integrated. And that integration happened in the Western societies, which he concentrated only on the Western civilization, Abrahamic civilizations, monotheistic civilizations, and there the bicameral mind broke down, and then for the connection, they created this monotheistic God, a voice of monotheistic God, prophets of monotheistic God, and all other voices would be deemed as the voices of the Saturn or voices of lesser gods. So they had to be destroyed. In case of India, what happened was the same bicameral mind was breaking down, but it got integrated. It got integrated into a substratum, a unity rather than a unit. That the God was the unit, here the Brahman was the unity. So all the voices of gods got internalized. They understood the voices of gods as part and parcel of their own self. And then the self itself is anchored in the Brahman. And this discovery that allowed them to accommodate theodiversity. When this discovery was not there, destruction of theodiversity and the establishment of an expansionist monopolistic religion becomes important. That marks actually the dawn of Indian civilization. When did it happen? Julian Jaynes gives a clue. When the introspective abilities of humanity started, then this aspect happened. So when you look at from that point of view, you have the Harappan seals where the meditative figure has been discovered, called Proto Shiva by some, Varuna by some, but there is a meditative figure, which really shows that an inner introspection, an inner voyage has been made possible some 3200 BCE. So this origin of this particular aspect, the integration of the bicameral mind and the realization of Brahman as the basis of theodiversity happened right there in Harappan civilization, which most probably is also Vedic civilization. So it is from there. The literary expression of the same we find in Vedic civilization. About the two birds, for example, the two birds were different and they find themselves as the one. Right? So this imagery shows that the bicameral integration happened in India, and it forms the basis of theodiversity. Protection and nourishing of theodiversity becomes the basis of Indian civilization.
So this, of course, this brings up a lot of more questions from conceptual as well as from fact point of view. One such thing is this term theodiversity. Now, say in Christianity, we have Protestants, we have Catholicism. And in India, the way the Christianity is practiced in India, especially in the place from where you come from, you have Roman Catholics and then you have Syrian churches. Is that theodiversity that you're talking about? Or what is theodiversity in your worldview?
Theodiversity is something towards which ultimately, if human civilization is to survive, it has to move towards that. Okay. Now you asked a question. You have Syrian Christians, you have Pentecostal Christians, you have Catholic Christians, you have different denominations of Christians. Is that theodiversity? Actually, that is the one aspect of, very important aspect of theodiversity. But this theodiversity always has time bombs within it. Because the Catholic Church, he thinks that it is the only true Christian religion. Okay. Now, suppose by some miracle, tomorrow, all the Hindus, I am not talking about the Protestant Christians in India, all the Hindus in India, they have become Roman Catholics. what would happen to Protestant Christians in India? They would be destroyed completely. It would be like what happened in Ireland during the IRA times. There would be bloodbath. Suppose all Hindus in India, they become Protestant Christians, the first thing they would do is they would finish off the Roman Catholics, right? So this theodiversity is something, it is just a gestational period for total annihilation of another community. That's all.
Sorry to interrupt, and a little bit of digression here, where you presented this fictitious, which could be also possible in due course. But then is it not paradoxical that today people who are preaching human right activism, or who are saying, who have the burden of preaching human rights to other lesser civilized nation, are all predominantly from Protestant or Catholic countries?
Yeah, mainly Protestant countries, yes. We will come to that actually. There's a very interesting psychological dimension there. Okay. So here, the minorities, the theodiversity in the other side of the fence is protected in India because theodiversity is the basis of this side of the fence. Okay. So here you have a model where completely different darshanas can coexist because of theodiversity. Somehow we have accommodated it, and we are very sure that this should not be destroyed, because in Bhumi Sukta and Atharva Veda, very specifically three diversities are mentioned. One is the ethnic diversity of people, linguistic diversity of people, theodiversity of people. And these are all accommodated in this land, Bhumi Sukta tells us. And protecting all these have been part and parcel of Indian culture. Whenever there has been a danger to theodiversity from expansionist monocultural religions, from the monocultures of the mind, the Hindu identity has revived itself, rejuvenated itself, and has come forth, and it has fought. Our Prime Minister very beautifully put it, whenever there has been an Aurangzeb, Shivaji would naturally arise. That is a kind of the basic civilizational organism of India, and that civilizational organism, its core, its vital core is Hindutva.
Now, taking the devil's advocate position, when you trade this path and talk about the theodiversity, of course, you made a mention about this monopolistic expansionist attitude with which certain sects grow, although you have given that as an answer. But my devil's advocate question would be, in that case, in this envelope of theodiversity, then what's the problem with conversion?
Yeah, the problem with conversion is that when you plan and when you execute a conversion, then it becomes a war. As you know, in an ecosystem, if a particular species is going to take over the entire ecosystem, then it is a invasive species. It is destroying the ecosystem completely. If within yourself some foreign component within your body, a foreign component comes and then it starts expanding, even if your own cell is starting expanding, a particular type of cell alone, it is expanding entirely, then it becomes a serious problem. In the same way, this conversion of an individual is not a problem at all. Conversion of an individual will always happen, whether it is from Christianity to Islam, or whether it is from Islam to Hinduism, or whether it is from Buddhism to Jainism, it will be happening, right? But when there is a movement to effect conversions, to wage a war against all other religions, all other worldviews, then that becomes a problem. That has to be contained. That is against theodiversity. It will destroy theodiversity. And once theodiversity is destroyed, what is the big problem? If Hinduism is destroyed, what is the big problem, we may ask? The answer is this. It will be worse than what happened in Alexandria when Christianity took over. We will be like a medieval state, because we have to understand this very clearly. Here we are coming to your other question, that the center of gravity of Christianity has shifted. Population center of gravity of Christianity has shifted already from Europe to Asia. Today, in communist ruled China, there are more number of Christians than some of the Christian countries in the West. In India, you have the highest number of, most probably, the highest number of Christians who adhere to a fundamentalist version of Christianity. In the West, Christianity has diluted itself to such an extent that in 2009, as you know, Lisa Miller was writing that we are all Hindus now because we accept that irrespective of denominations, whoever is doing good will attain salvation. Now, that is a very Hindu point of view. But if you come to India and you ask a Christian, he would say that only a Christian would be able to go to heaven, irrespective of the fact whether he was good or bad, and a Hindu cannot go to heaven. Point is, you have here a big mass of your core religion is who adhere to your religion in a fundamentalist way, and that is the most vulnerable population that can be manipulated. And Western countries are more than happy to manipulate such big masses. They become the cannon fodder for whatever strategic games the West plays. Hence, they will now become advocates of human rights and all that only to weaken the Indian state so that these more organized masses and their leaders can become the mediators. If you look at all these northeast insurgencies, you will find one thing very interesting. The church didn't just, initially they wanted to get a separate Christian state, divide the particular part from India and become a separate Christian state. Then they understood one thing very clearly. What is more profitable? What is more profitable is that you become the mediator between the government and the people. That way, you will be able to get all the benefits from the Indian state. You will be able to keep the entire population under your control. They have been trying this in the northeast. They have been doing this in the coastal regions of Kerala and Tamil Nadu, and they have been repeating this. So this is the danger of conversion, and it destroys the nation. It destroys our civilizational being.
Yeah, I mean, to put it in a very layman's language, is that when we grow a farm, there are, I mean, pests also growing along with it. So if we just take a very grandstanding saying my soil is there to grow anything and everything, then I'll end up just growing pests and not my regular cultivar. That also brings to several interesting questions also, but I'll quickly skip to your other expositions. And the second chapter is Bharat Mata, Vande Mataram and Akhand Bharat. I'll come in the reverse order. So what's your take about this Akhand Bharat concept?
Okay. Akhand Bharatam, as visualized by the ideologues of Hindutva, or the people who are Hindutvites in the post-independent period, naturally, like Pandit Dindayal Upadhyaya to Babasaheb Devaras. They have visualized actually a cultural, economic, cooperative network. They have told it very clearly. Akhand Bharatam is not a military expansionist fantasy. They were the first people to talk about creating a cooperation among the people of Pakistan, Bangladesh, India, Nepal, Burma, Sri Lanka, all this together. We should, because we ultimately we live in the same eco-cultural zone. So we belong to the same star. We have to come together. Our problems are going to be the same. When there is going to be global climate change and the sea levels rising, the problem of Bangladesh is also the problem of India. So ultimately we should have a kind of cooperation. And when the SARC movement was started, Balasaheb Devarasji was actually very happy because this is a right step towards Akhand Bharatam. These people had strong faith in humanity. You can even call it at times an utopian dream faith, but they had strong faith in humanity. They thought that the power of these religious creeds on the people would get diluted over a period of time if we remain strong as a civilization and a nation state, and if we are helping the people around with the different networks in terms of trade, in terms of culture, in terms of aid, everything. But then the problem was Pakistan became a rogue state, and from Bangladesh you are having a lot of infiltrators problem. All this is there. But the vision of Akhand Bharat is still there. It is a strong vision, and the danger is it can go the other way, because right now as we are talking, As I was ending the book, I realized it, so that is not there in the book here. The most important transnational organizations working in this landmass we call Akhand Bharat, the greater Indian landmass. All the three are fundamentalist Islamist organizations. Jamaati Islam, Tabligh Jamaat, Tawheed Jamaat. Okay. All these are transnational organizations and they are working strongly and they are creating bonds and they also are trying to achieve the so-called Akhand Bharat, which is completely an Islamic state. The Akhand Bharat that the Hindutvites are talking about is an Akhand Bharat where all the faiths are accommodated. So that is the difference, basically.
Just extending that question even further, because even now it is quite popular that thanks to the G20 summit and our country positioned as a leader in the G20, we have this phrase Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. Now, on one hand, it's Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, that is, talks about the entire earth as one Kutumba, and on the other, there is a geographical concept of Akhand Bharat. But from the way I understand, you are kind of talking both together. And this is where also there is a threat to the theodiversity as well as there is an inclusion to the theodiversity. So how do you see, how do you reconcile between Akhand Bharat and Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam?
When we were teenagers, we had this saying among our Sangh people, Eka Bharatam, Sreshta Bharatam, Akhanda Bharatam, Visala Bharatam, Visva Bharatam. Okay. So, in a way, it is, we become strong civilizationally and we become a benediction and a peace to the world around us. That is what Vivekananda says actually. He says that I don't want to look into the future, but still I can see one vision from the future. It is that Bharat Mata is in the throne of among the community of nations and let us declare her to the world through the words of peace and deeds of benediction. So that is how. It is not an empire that we are thinking of when we talk about Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam or when we tell that India is going to be a Viswaguru. We are talking about how we are going to take these values of the way of living to the world civilizations. Now, as of now, if you take the world civilization, the dominant civilization is of course the Abrahamic civilization. Then there are the natural religions like that of the African aborigines, the Australian aborigines, African spiritual traditions, Native American culture, etc., etc. But they are all hindered. They don't find their voice very strongly outside. If they want to raise their voice, for example, a Native American, if he wants to show his culture and practice his religion, somehow he will have to theologically compromise with Christianity. So there are Native American churches where the Jesus would be dressed in Native American dress, but the theology is going to be Christian theology. The Native American spirituality will not find a place there, or it will find a minor place like a small dressing on the cake. What Hindu spirituality can offer to the world civilizations is that we validate their spirituality. We tell that yes, the Brahman that attained through my spiritual traditions, the same Brahman you can also realize through your spiritual traditions. So your spiritual tradition is as valid as my temple worship. So your shamanic dance is as important as a Vedic fire ritual. This spiritual validation can actually empower these hindered communities across the world, and that will enrich the entire planet and humanity. So this Hindutva that we have in this Bharatvarsh is a blessing to humanity in this sense. So we have a civilizational responsibility. See, today you and I are not Hindus because of accident of birth. It is because at one point of time, both our ancestors somewhere were shown either allurements or the sword, and they were asked to quit their religion and embrace another religion. They chose not to. They chose dharma over threat of death. They chose dharma over allurements. Because of that, today you and I are here as Hindus. So this is a responsibility that has been given to us, a civilizational responsibility. We have to take it and we have to give it to the world. That is our duty. And today I think the time has actually come. So to do that, first we have to consolidate our base. And we have to at least make sure that in Pakistan, in Bangladesh, the people realize their civilizational ancestry, the greatness. Okay, fine, you have become Muslims. Okay, I am not telling tomorrow you leave Islam and you come to Hinduism. I am not telling that. I am telling that you at least create a Bharathiya Islam where the theodiversity would be accommodated. Actually, if you look at a very ordinary Muslim in India, I have seen this again and again. Okay, a Muslim child drops a book. The leg has accidentally touched the book. It at once touches the book and does this gesture of veneration. So, what actually it means, right? This thing is there in your blood already. It is there inside you. All we have to do is touch the right spots and make them realize that deep inside we are one. And making them realize that civilizational responsibility is Akhand Bharat. And then giving the gift of Hindutva to the entire planet and empowering the hindered civilizations, that is Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam.
But I guess the detractors, I'm just taking the opposite stand now, just for the sake of it. You just gave a good example that today, even if a Muslim child by mistake touches a leg to the book, it shows a gesture which is reflective of a Hindu ethos of respecting every animate and inanimate object. Now, what fictitiously, if you think all the entire Indian so-called Hindu population gets converted to Muslim, or say earlier it was told about Roman Catholic, and still retains this ethos, it would then be called, okay, you're culturally still continuing, you have all those practices, but now, okay, fine, you're instead of Hindu, you're Islam. So,
okay, let us take that hypothetical scenario. Okay, we don't even have to go by hypothesis. We can go to Goa, time travel back, and see what happened to those Hindus who got converted, okay, to Christianity, but tried to maintain their civilizational gestures. They were burnt at stake in Inquisition. Okay, and in Bangladesh or in Pakistan, all you need is a Taliban regime that would actually, in Bangladesh it actually happened, 1971 genocide. Even the Muslims who were practicing Hindu cultural gestures were killed. So that actually, these two actually answer your question. These gestures are there still inside them because still India has maintained its nature. If it is gone magically, as you said, then these people who adhere to these gestures would be killed completely. For example, in India, you take the example of any Muslim musician. Some of the greatest musicians of Islamic community have come from India. Can you imagine such a Muslim in Afghanistan? Forget those great maestros. You take an ordinary jingle writer who had become a music director today, like A.R. Rahman. Okay, you think that if A.R. Rahman does the same thing that he does here in Afghanistan, would he be allowed to live? Afghanistan was once Kandara Desa. And A.R. Rahman is not a person known for his love for Indian civilization. Yet, for his music, it is always better that he lives in a place like India. So, that explains it.
and needless to say, the recent Taliban government in Afghanistan, how they are coming behind educational institutions, needless to say, the music aspect of it. Anyway, coming to Bharat Mata, because it's the first term in this chapter, again, taking the opposite stand, is it a colonial import? Because Western countries seems to have this, especially the European countries have this connotation of anthropomizing the country, and through mother or the father, that's how fraternity and motherland concept comes. There is a deep entrenched school of thought that this concept of Bharat Mata is also such kind of an import which got mobilized during the colonial era, and ever since we got independence, we got stuck to it. But I believe we have, I mean, when we say even Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, which we discussed, we consider even the entire earth as a mother, Vasudha, as a feminine form. So how is it that in your chapter you attack this criticism and lay your points.
Well, as you rightly said, the concept of the entire earth as a mother, the place where you live as a mother, has been there in India right from the Vedic times. And also the goddess who fights for the people, taking the bow and the arrow in her hand, it is there in Vaksutta. And later you find that, very interestingly, this goddess who is wielding the bow and the arrow and fights for Dharma, the goddess appears as Saraswati in Buddhist sutras. It's a very interesting thing here actually, though it is a small diversion, I will concentrate on this. Usually when people talk about certain ethics and ethos, they tell that these were all the Vedic Brahminical religion borrowed from Buddhism. Right? But here is a very strong data that shows that the concept of a feminine bodhisattva was not there in original Buddhism. It is after seeing the Vedic goddesses, it is the influence of the Vedic Dharma that a feminine bodhisattva could be included into Buddhism. So the Vak, she becomes actually this Saraswati who fights for Dharma. And in Mahabharata there is this Arjuna's stotra to Durga, where he very explicitly says that stotra, even if Mahabharata is layered text, I believe that this particular text should be now 2250 years old. Okay, in this stotra, actually Arjuna talks about the goddess who is worshipped in every temple of Jambudvipa. The goddess who is Dharma, who is the essence of Brahman. The goddess who has his chariot with the flag of peacock. So this goddess, if you read the description that is given in this Arjuna's stotra, and then if you read Bande Mataram of Bankim Chandra Chatterjee, you will find that it is a resonance across space and time actually. Okay, and the goddess who wields the weapons when there is a problem for her people. Vaksutta says that almost it is like a promise given to the people of India. So when actually the Madurai Sultanate was doing destroying Dharma in this part of the land and torturing people and destroying temples, slaughtering the cows, a Kambana Nayaka comes, and Kambana Nayaka is given the sword by Madurai Meenakshi according to Madhurā Vijay. Right? Ganga Devi wrote that, and as you said in the previous thing, Ganga Devi, right now if you are going to do the classification, she should be OBC or MBC. And she was a woman, and she wrote the epic in classic in Sanskrit. Okay, so here you have this goddess coming up and giving the sword. And you know the famous calendar art everywhere where the Durga Devi gives the sword to Shivaji, and it is called Bhavani. And Chandivar was written by Guru Govinda Singh, and the dagger that was his dagger, the divine dagger he calls it, it is Bhagavati. Now incidentally, Bhagavati is the name of the goddesses of Kanyakumari. Okay, so you have here from Punjab, a warrior for Dharma comes and his dagger is named Bhagavati, and this expression of the divine feminine as a combative Sakti offering resistance against this monopolistic aggression has always been there in Indian culture. And whenever there is a drought, whenever there are famines, the people used to worship Kali, invoke Kali. Okay, and all this combined together, and it has already precipitated into the image of the goddess, the Kali, fighting against the British. And then Bankim Chandra Chatterjee gave a beautiful mantric effect to it through Bande Mataram. And it. So to call it colonial import is a very superficial way of looking at things without the understanding of Indian history and civilization.
Two ancillary questions, maybe not directly related, just thinking aloud in this line, that even Mahakavi Bharathiyar also venerated the land in the feminine form, and you and I know about what he had told. So is it language chauvinism when you say Vande Mataram of Bankim Chandra Chatterjee was kind of given a forefront and not Bharathiyar's veneration of
No, Bharati himself translated Vande Mataram. Vande Mataram enbom engal manilattaye vanangudam enbom is how he sings So Vande Mataram transcends languages. Okay. And every day morning in all South Indian houses, you can hear Vasalyadi Gunochvalam Bhagavatim Vande Jagan Mataram. So this Vande Mataram is a mantra that transcends language barriers. You can never confine it to, because it was discovered in Bengal by a Bengali, that's all. So there is no, can't even imagine that language chauvinism is associated with it.
The other slightly tangential question to it is when the Velar, in terms of sword being Bhagavati, or wherever there is this Kotravai, and then there is handing of this weapon by goddess to either Shiva or comes. Is it again coming back to this neuronal connection, or because these weapons are associated with blood, and somehow blood is also associated with women? Is that the connection that we come across between sword and women?
It is a possibility, very frankly, let me tell you one thing. I haven't gone into that particular aspect. See, in the case of Madhurā Vijayam, in the case of Shivaji, in the case of Guru Gobind Singh, okay, we understand. It is part of mythologies and all that. You have that Naga queen in 20th century. She is cut off from so-called Brahminic culture, according to our historians and sociologists. Okay, she decides to fight against the British, and she gets into meditation. She visits a cave, and in the cave she gets the vision of the goddess on a tiger and handling him her rifle. Okay. Now, when I read that description, actually I got goosebumps, and as you know me personally, I am not given to anything supernatural, and I am almost a person bordering the atheist, right? But when I read it, I got goosebumps, and I kind of, this is Bharat Mata, right? So the Ganga Devi was not telling some imagination. Here right now, this woman doesn't have to tell this. So this is a reality, a civilizational reality. She comes up. I don't know how. Okay, I will leave it at that.
But something that may interest you, because it's in your arsenal. There is one historian by name Philozat.
Okay.
She's from Goa, married to a French. That he's also an Indologist. And she has come out, her thesis is the entire Madhurā Vijayam is a figment of imagination. It's not something historical. And there are theses written on her work as well. So something that we need to really look at and seriously.
Because this is repetitive. See, if somebody imagines it and then through cultural diffusion it traveled somewhere and then Shivaji got it, okay. How Guru Gobind Singh got it? That is one. And then how this Naga queen got it? That really you will have, there is a phenomenon you have to explain there actually.
That's true. It's interesting. Moving ahead, now very controversial and made controversial perhaps, and you have touched a raw nerve I think in this third chapter about cow and the related, you have right now a lot of discourses going on, and this is not a recent phenomenon. I mean, this is the land where bloodshed has happened in different parts of the country for people who have saints who have come for dharna against slaughter of the cows, and they have been killed. And this has got a very bloody past. Let me just put the question in a very pointed way by taking the opposite stand once again, that why should a state dictate a food culture? What's the problem with, say, beef eating in that case?
Well, a state should not dictate food culture, right? I agree with it completely. And as a Hindutvaite, I don't have any problem with someone eating beef. Okay? This I am staying in the authority of none other than Guruji Golwalkar. Okay? But I have a problem with cow slaughter. Very serious problem. Cow slaughter has been the deed by which Hindus have been humiliated in this nation. Number one. Number two, you talked about food culture, okay? There was an attempt to impose a food culture on India that would have destroyed the very civilizational and economic spine of India as a nation. Had that particular project been successful, today we won't be sitting and talking like that. We would be living in reservations like Native Americans, and the British would be ruling entire India. That didn't happen because of this, this bony looking ordinary our country cow. Okay, that has been made villainous by even post-independent Indian propaganda. Because when the Britishers came here, they saw all these cows roaming around, and their mouth was watering like anything. How many cantonments of soldiers could be fed easily by these cows? And how our armies can actually march across Afghanistan and throughout the world, and we can become world conquerors. Let us start killing the cows. But what was standing before them was that cows would not be killed in this land. So they started promoting this food culture, imposing this food culture of killing the cow and eating it as a kind of, some kind of social emancipation. Okay. It was all propaganda, even from the time of company, East India Company, they started promoting this. Even they funded some pundits to prove that during the Vedic times the cows were eaten and all that kind of things. With ambiguous data, they started doing all those things. But fact remains that in India we are wedded to cow protection. Okay, it is a civilisational ethos. We will come to that particular aspect later. That how it is a civilisational ethos and why it is a civilisational ethos. We will come to that later. But the point is, we would protect the cow. But the British wanted the cow to be destroyed. Why we wanted to protect the cow, and why the British wanted to create a culture of cow eating? Because if cow is destroyed, Indian agriculture is destroyed. If Indian agriculture is destroyed, then the entire nation is dependent on the charity of the British Empire. And you will be having people who are ready to work in cheap labor. Their honor gone, their self-dignity gone. They would be all indentured laborers in will, right? But that was stopped by the people who fought for cow protection. Ramachandra Kuka, the Kuka movement. That was the first movement that started against beef eating imposed by the British.
Just on a lighter note, you are referring to the older Ramachandra Guha and not the
Kuka.
recent one.
KU, not this character.
No. Because
no, I am
this
not
character
talking
is
about any
known for
abomination.
promoting beef eating in a very, very...
No. So, the Kuka movement, they were part of the Sikh Panth. So they started fighting against the British. They were the first to start a Swadesi movement, and they were massacred. They were tied to the mouths of the cannon and they were blasted. But the point is, the cow protection movement became strong throughout India, and then the British couldn't lay their hands on the cows, and thus this nation was protected. I will give you another example from South India, that of Vallalar. Okay. Now today there is a big Dravidian movement to de-Hinduize Vallalar. When Vallalar was asked to write a prose book for the coming generations at that time, he wrote a book on Manunidi Chola, who actually killed his own son for the sake of calf. The passage is very important where Vallalar describes it. The passage is this: the son had ran his chariot over the calf. Calf had died. The cow had come there asking for justice. The king says he is not here talking about prayashita. He is not talking about parihara. He is telling that I am going to suffer the same. It is totally empathy, anukampa. That I am going to feel the same grief that the cow felt. So I am going to kill my son. The Brahmins in his court, okay, and the learned people in his court, they are saying you don't have to do that. The Dharma Shastras has given you a lot of prayachitas for this. You don't have to do this. The king then explains to the Brahmins, okay, according to Allah, how the cow is an embodiment of all the Deva Devatas. And hence, making a cow grief is a big offense, the greatest offense that you can imagine. So he goes on, and you know what he did to the son. The point that you have to note here is, this was the time when the British rule was creating slowly famines. And Vallala realized this. And he created a Anna Dana Sampradaya, in which the fire of the kitchen would always be lit. There was only one condition. the persons who come and take food there, they should become completely vegetarians. It was Jiva Karunya associated with the idea of cow protection. So because of that, otherwise in South India also this food culture of beef eating could have been imposed, and that would have played havoc on our agricultural system. And at that time it was because of the agricultural system that we could actually generate a freedom fighting movement. Without that indigenous economic support, our freedom fight movement could not have lasted for a long time. So if we today are independent today, it is because of that poor cow. We at least owe that gratitude to that cow, that we don't.
But how do you reconcile with the fact that economically today India is at the top ranking places when it comes to beef export?
Actually, I deal with that here. See, here you have to understand one thing. The beef in India, as I said before, I don't have a problem with beef. Okay, beef means actually it is ox, it is buffalo, it is calf, everything. And in India, the beef production, because of all the civilisational ethos, civilisational checks and balances, because of all this, the beef that India generates is the most, I would say, Dharmic beef. It may be a contradiction of terms, it may even shock the people, and they are going to have a this thing. But the point is this: in India, you cannot create an industry that kills cow for the sake of beef. You can collect beef. You may have people who take the dead cow, you can collect the beef and you can do it. There are some places, still it is not at a corporate level, where old cows are killed, and I am totally against killing the cow. Okay, totally against killing the cow. But the beef, once the cow is dead, taking the beef and processing it and exporting it, fine. It is the least ecologically harmful beef. And if this happens, then somewhere else the cows will be protected, like from South America. So,
Though this having on one aspect dealt with the Hindutva, it's also the policy of vehement Goraksha, cow protection. This economic indulgence is a recent phenomenon, right? And just taking fast forwarding it ahead, do you think that this backing of the Sankalpa of Go Samrakshana will be sustained, what you call quote unquote Dharmic beef production? Do you think it's a sustainable thing, given that this economic phenomenon is a recent phenomenon? For the years to come, do you think that this concept of producing Dharmic beef is a sustainable one, or you will see a change once the corporate culture completely takes over?
That is where we have to be very, very vigilant. That corporates and big companies do not take this and do not convert it into adharmic cow slaughtering and beef production. Taking the cows in big numbers and killing them and then producing the beef. We have to stop that. When that comes, see what is happening is you have to look at another one politics that is happening here. In the global north, beef is the most ecologically damaging meat. So it will always, the West right now would be searching for, the global north would be searching for areas where they could produce cows and they could import all their ecological problems to some other area and tell them that you will get dollars. So when that happens, when that pressure comes, it is the cow protection culture of India that will protect India's environment. We should say no to that. We are not yet, we may go there. When we go there, cow protection should be the sole guiding point to stop us from entering into that adharmic and ecologically damaging domain.
Somehow I'm a little bit pessimistic on this aspect because given the scientific history of certain aspects of our country. So if you look at the practice of, say, cotton, the way the cotton was produced in our country, or even for that matter, iron, the way iron was kind of processed. Very recently, like 100 years past, if you see the way we had produced dyes. Today, textile industry is one of the major pollutants of our rivers. And recently in Tamil Nadu, they have declared the Noyal and this Kuvam dead river. And thanks to all the textile industry which dumped their dyes. And that is a recent phenomenon, last 50, 60, 80 years phenomenon. it was the introduction of synthetic dye alizarin by the German companies, and there was a political backing for that, because of which the traditional use of biodegradable dyes got completely eradicated. But this is not overnight. I'm talking about alizarin was introduced in late 1890s by German people. And similarly, if you look at in the perfumery side, the sandalwood oil, the way to extract it. And so what I'm trying to say is wherever there is economics always sees for opportunities, where there is a maximum, typical utilitarian and capitalistic mindset. So when that has taken over, we have seen examples of certain commodities that I give an example. We have seen that this so-called dharmic bent of mind has always taken a backstage. So much so that today to produce organic dyes, organic colors, it's an impossible task. You go to any even awardee, national awardee painters, be it on fabric or on paint, they would vouch for it. So that's why I asked a question which, given this so-called, you have made a new phrase, dharmic beef, as a new thing. Do you see as a sustainable thing, or will that also take over?
I will tell one answer to this is, in the case of your dyes, there was no civilizational explicit check and balance. In the case of beef, there is a very explicit emotional check and balance in the form of cow veneration in India. Right? So, it is not easy. And it will come back with such a, in this book I have explained one particular aspect, okay, in post-independent India, Britishers did all this, I told you. But later when our independent rulers came, they wanted to promote cow slaughter, and they generated actually propaganda material using even Smithsonian institution people, that cows overgrazing was changing the land into deserts. Photos were specially taken for that, and they were put on the magazines, and it was taken to all the people, and all the people were convinced. All the English magazine reading people, Dharmic, Adharmic, all that, okay, Abrahamic, all Hindus, everybody were convinced that overgrazing is a great ecological danger created by cow protection in India. But down the line, even people were shot dead when they took their cow for grazing into the forest lands. So forest land and villages were completely removed. Only the village communities were alienated, cows were not allowed inside. Later, in the early 90s, they discovered that the whole thing was a sham. They should have allowed the village communities to go enter the forest, and they should have allowed the cows to graze in the lands. If that grazing had actually happened, then the forest peripheral areas would have been richer, the deer population would have been higher, the tigers wouldn't go out, the tiger population would also have been higher. So here you have an example of how post-independent propaganda had actually tried to kill the cows. But cow protection naturally came up. See, this is like in the case of Ram Setu. Okay. In the case of Ram Setu, if you see, it is almost like the structure created its own defense, like in the Avatar movie perhaps. The structure created its own defense. It was had you destroyed it, the entire Gulf of Mannar biodiversity hotspot would have been destroyed. But this structure, what it did, it created certain civilizational memories and it stopped. That does not mean that ecological devastation would not be happening in the inner parts of India, but there it has shown how a civilizational memory can be taken. It doesn't matter whether it's a natural formation or whether it was man-made. A civilizational memory can save an ecological heritage. The same way a civilizational ethos can save biodiversity. It is a civilizational ethos. In fact, one of the much maligned personality in the history of India is by Hindutva itself, Mahatma Gandhi. Mahatma Gandhi made this very important, cow protection, and he told, rather than legislation, you should convince the people who are doing the cow slaughtering that protecting the cow is the greatest human civilizational ethos. What exactly does he mean by that? That we should do a dharmic outreach to the non-dharmic people, touch their dharmic core and stop them slaughtering the cow. It was a great outreach program that he was suggesting actually. Okay, so cow protection I am 100% sure that if corporates enter into beef production, and that is why they are trying all this, no, the beef biryani, beef this, beef that, food right, everything. Put the things in proper civilizational perspective. Point out that it is the cow protection that has actually protected the diversity of Indian food culture. Wherever there is no cow protection, it is the corporate food culture that has destroyed the food diversity. We have to present the whole thing in the proper perspective and take it to the people. Then we can stop this adharmic cow slaughtering beef production.
I appreciate that optimistic outlook, and I hope things fall in place in that order. But just going ahead, I'll come to my pet peeve, which is your last chapter, Science and Hindutva.
Penultimate chapter.
Sorry, yeah, penultimate chapter. Yeah. Science and Hindutva.
Okay.
Now, why did you phrase it this science and Hindutva? I'll start with that question itself.
But before that, I have to tell a very important thing here, because this is on record. I want to tell this. The next edition of this book will be carrying a particular correction in this book, thanks to you. It is about the eclipse, the elliptical orbits. And here I have stated that before Tycho Brahe, Kepler, it was Aryabhatta who discovered it. That was an overstatement. Aryabhatta had the knowledge of elliptical orbit, but he didn't extend it to the planets actually. And that was actually brought to me by you, your correction, and I thank you for that. Okay.
Thank you.
So, now coming to science and Hindutva, because I have been an avid reader of popular science books for a long time, now more than 30 years. And I have discovered one thing. In the clash of narratives, or in the building of narratives, in the building of civilizational narratives in the 20th, 21st century, science and the narratives of science play a very important role. We are lagging behind. And we are not properly putting forth what actually our contribution in science is. And we have allowed our enemies to create a stereotype that we are people obsessed with Vedic Vimanas, Vedic nuclear weapons, and we are only interested in the therapeutic effects of cow urine, and hence we are basically anti-science people. But actually when you get into the real material, you find that Hindutva has contributed even as a movement in the 20th century, and before that as a civilizational process. It has helped in the creation of institutions of science as well as different frameworks of science. So I wanted to highlight that in this particular chapter.
The reason I ask is because, as you rightly said, there is a lot of misinformation among the mass, either deliberate or by design, either by design or by default, that is either one pitted against the other, Hindutva versus science. But I like that way you put it, science and Hindutva. Because as you have also rightly said, the contributions that have been made from this geographical land called India by the Indians have been much more prominent, which needs to be put in the right perspective. And to just quote one of the former CSIR scientists who happens to be leading an institute in Kerala, not far from your place, it's called Indian Institute of Science Heritage, Dr. N. Gopalakrishnan, who has very famously puts it, saying many people have the feeling that India's contribution to science is zero. There's a pun played around that word zero. So, having said that, see, science, I'm sure, I completely agree that you will also agree with me. Science is a method to approach to quote unquote the truth. Now, method could be always refined. So, on one hand, where Hindutva lays its starting points from Veda, which are by definition like permanent, non-evolving. On the other hand, you have science, which is a method which keeps evolving. How do you reconcile between one which doesn't evolve, one is frozen in time, yet venerable, whereas with the other which is kind of always dynamic? So much so that even Einstein seems to have said that within 100 years, if somebody come and do not prove me wrong, then this is not a good science. So this falsifiability, and then what Karl Popper talks about, the philosophy of science. All said and done, science being a method is dynamic. The take-home point is that. So what you're pitting one, which is Hindutva, basing on Veda, which is kind of ephemeral, frozen in time, versus this, not versus, and the science which is dynamic. How do you see these two reconciling?
Well, Hindutva is not based on Vedas. Okay, let us be very clear about it. But Hindutva is very much dependent on how the different darshanas have viewed Vedas. And we have space for that. So you have a Sankhya person viewing Veda, and you have a Vaiseshika person, a Mimamsaka viewing Vedas. Be different from how a Vedantin views Vedas. And all the people have viewed Vedas in different ways, and from there had risen actually the science of grammar, science of meaning, science of rituals, and how rituals are related to, or if I can let me secularize it and say how my activities and my gestures and my deeds are related to the grammar, how the meaning and the word are related. All these have come from multiple interpretations of Vedas. Right? And because Vedas are Apurushaya, and actually Dr. Rangan, you would have known him, right, from Bangalore, he gives a very beautiful meaning to this term Apurushaya. He says that these came from those depths of consciousness untainted by the human emotions and human biases. That is why they are Apurushaya. So these are not something that were in some cosmic archive that got downloaded as we would visualize in a very crude way. But these are things that came from the poetic expressions of very deep inner realities. And hence you can view them through different windows. This Vedic way of understanding through various darshanas has given us various windows. The 6 darshanas. And apart from that, there is also the dependent causation that is present in Buddhism. Then there is the Saptabhangi that is present in Jainism. So you have this, what I call epistemological pluralism. And it has sprung from Vedas. From the ability of Vedas to allow themselves to multiple perception. That is the core of Hindutva. Let me contrast this with Buddhism. Okay, Buddhism also developed this later, but in the case of Buddhism, there is a statement about what type of medical instruments to use. They say that Buddha suggested this length of an instrument should be used, not this length of an instrument. Okay, he may be right in some places, he may be wrong in some places, but the point is he suggested that became a guiding principle. In the case of Vedas, there is no such authoritative guiding principles, despite the fact that because this Protestant thinking that Vedas are a book like a Bible, Vedas are timeless books, they are fixed and hence they are a kind of dictating stagnant religious authority, they were not that. They were a kind of a nebula that was, I would say, that was the typical Schrodinger's box into which millions of states of kittens existed. Okay, so you can actually collapse them into different realities, and you created windows out of that reality, and each window can communicate to you reality in a way. There is the famous statement by Albert Einstein that if I remember correctly, if you are having only epistemology without science, then that is just fancy. But if you are trying to do science without epistemology, even if that was possible, it is very crude and primitive. Okay, you need epistemology to do good science. And multiple epistemologies, you can, that is the problem again with Western science. In the Western science, you had an Aristotelian philosophy alone was taken, and it was wedded to the monotheistic belief system of the church, and a strong concrete foundation was made. That foundation helped perhaps. Okay, they created natural theology. Perhaps with the help of natural theology, you could understand the mechanism of how a particular thing functions. But when something like evolution comes and it sweeps away the foundation, when a quantum mechanics comes, it sweeps away the foundation of an objective reality, then you are in search of an alternate epistemology. And in India, you have multiple windows. You can use one window or you can use other window, right? Yeah, so actually, George Sudarshan, he pointed out one aspect. Okay, he said that there is an Advaitic joy in discovery. Okay, when you discover something, there is a humbling. At the same time, you are one with the reality. Something happens that is very Advaitic. And this search for this Advaitic thing makes the entire science a sadhana. This psychology of science is apolitical and it is universal. As against the so-called scientific temper, which is a very political uh, just slogan, right? So Hindutva is wedded to this particular aspect of science, the joy of science. In fact, George Sudarshan again, he pointed out that when you tell Vishnu Sahasranama, the very first word is Viswam, okay, which means the entire universe is the body of Vishnu. And when I am studying the physical universe, I am studying the body of Vishnu, and it makes the entire science a sadhana. So that is the basis of Hindutva here.
Just taking that a little bit far, ever since this Western European physicists, starting from Einstein, or even the fathers of quantum mechanics, when they started to beat Heisenberg, or when they started to allude to the Upanishadic phrases, Upanishadic themes, it has become somehow very romantic and stylistic even for the Indian scientists to allude to these. For instance, C.V. Raman never kind of alluded to any of the Upanishadic teachings, despite entrenched in the civilization and being a Brahmin himself and stuff like that. So the reason that I'm alluding to this is there's also a trait of Western European alluding to it. That's why some of the Indian scientists found it a little fancy. Having said that, when I talked about Hindutva being in the Vedic, and you rightly kind of bring out the nuance part of it, perhaps you may also be aware that when you, even within our own traditional darshanas, you have two aspects, the worldly affairs and the trans-worldly affairs, Vyavaharika and Paramarthika. So for instances concerning Paramarthika, you have Veda as a reference. For the Vyavaharika, for them also Veda is not the reference. For instance, there is a saying which goes in the Nyaya, Navya in Sanskrit, that if I want to say that there are 10 fruits in that tree, I don't need a Vedic reference for me to go. I have to just go and see it. And that's how I confer. So that kind of a difference is always there, even among the epistemologists within the tradition as well. Now the other point is, today when we see science, it is now with the advent of AI, machine learning, it talks about consciousness. And today there is the kind of research that Western science invests on consciousness studies, especially in the wake of artificial intelligence. Do you think that borders to the Indian ethos, Indian philosophical, this epistemological ethos that you talk of?
See, now if we are going to talk about this, basically we have to talk about from the speculative possibilities, right? And I think I can give you at least 3 examples here. Just I will give 3 examples. One is that of Jagdish Chandra Bose, and another is that of George Sudarshan, and another is that of Subhash Kak. Okay, they all have contributed, and they have all their contribution comes from their Vedantic background, right? Now, if you take a PhD student, say an average PhD student in physics from Cambridge, he would be thorough with a very fundamental understanding of Greek philosophies, Democritus, and he would have an understanding, Plato, he would have an understanding, right? But if you take an average PhD student in India, he would never have that understanding of Indian darshanas. What is happening is that, so we are diverged from that and we are studying them as a kind of psychologically, we are separate from it and we are studying it. So we are able to understand, but we are not able to creatively contribute. So that creative contribution level has actually come down for us. Despite the fact that, as you rightly said, we have a lot of advantages. For example, you take quantum mechanics. In quantum mechanics, understanding quantum mechanics, understanding a double slit experiment, it has actually a lot of problems for a Western mind. Whereas an Indian mind doesn't have a problem, provided it is already it has studied Hindu philosophical traditions. Unfortunately, our child is not taught Hindu philosophical traditions. So it has to study it only for the sake of marks. There, they have a philosophical understanding of their tradition. And when they study quantum mechanics, they have a problem, and that problem becomes a kind of like a labor pain for creativity. Here we don't have that labor pain because we study it only for the sake of marks. And we don't have the advantage of Indian cultural or Indian knowledge systems. Indian knowledge systems is not just the ancient knowledge systems like ancient mathematics or ancient astronomy. It is also the Sankhya or this giving you a worldview. Now, with that, a Jagdish Chandra Bose could accomplish. With that, a George Sudarshan could accomplish. And there are exceptions to the system. If we make the system this, then how many achievers would be there? That is number one. Number two, coming to the AI and the consciousness studies, in consciousness studies, we definitely have an upper hand. But that window is closing, in my opinion. And we are not taking it seriously except to pat ourselves on our back. Right? We have this consciousness, but seriously have we started studying it? And another one very important field that I am feeling we are being lazy is the study of the neurological dimensions of spiritual experiences. This is going to define the narrative on religion in the coming years. And we have a great advantage here. You would have heard of John Lilly, right? And he did experiments with the dolphins, and he also did experiments on communications and everything. And he had a great inspirations and insights he got from Patanjali. Okay. And he developed this floating tanks which would desensitize you of everything. So this kind of experiments are being Andrew Newberg right now, and they are doing these experiments. Buddhism is having a better dialogue with these cutting edge science developments and consciousness and others. And you have a person like the recent Nobel laureate, what is his name? He was working on quantum teleportation. It starts with Z. And he used to come to Dharmashala and he used to have continuous dialogues with Dalai Lama. Okay? Two aspects. One is Hinduism, despite its richness, it is not engaging in those dialogues. And this may be problematic. Our dharmacharyas are not open to science. Already, one thing they say already it's all there in our this, and they have to learn from us. We have already developed mathematics, and we have already developed this, and ISRO is using our mathematical model, those kind of things, and they belittle themselves and dharma. I think that dharmacharyas should be given a 101 goals in science, basic science, and the philosophies of science. And they should be made to have an interaction dialogue with the scientists. If that happens, then India will be able to contribute in a very big way in consciousness studies and AI from a civilisational point of view. Otherwise, from an institutional point of view, we will be able to contribute.
On that note, although there are various other aspects and questions that can be asked, but I'm sure your book has dealt in with various aspects of this. Just while we close it, it's very good that you talked about Jagdish Chandra Bose and given his background and how he contributed. Perhaps for the benefit of our listeners, actually the whole experiment or invention of that crescograph was to kind of demystify the spiritual element or the spiritual belief that the people had.
Vitalist elements, that's the difference. We have to be very clear about this, because at that time this vitalism, which actually is a kind of dualism, was there. And when Jagdish Chandra Bose did that, he wanted not to create a materialist monism, rather he wanted to show a unity of all elements, all life and non-life. He wanted to show in unity. And again, there are papers now on what is called neurobiology of plants. Okay, in that a particular author has told that what Jagdish Chandra Bose actually proposed was a kind of a process philosophy. Okay, and which is very, this thing, we don't have this problem of the dualism of the Cartesian dualism of vital and the physical. So I think the demystification is only for the sake of only it is something that you view it from a vitalist or a quasi-European point of view.
That's one definitely an academic aspect of it, but the popular aspect of it, in his own words, is that because it was in the temple
Yes, it was the
premises,
temple. It used to do a
it used to bend.
prostration and
So people
yes.
used to. So he writes saying that it has got nothing
was-
to do with
yes.
that, and because he made he adopted Western scientific method to measure the rate of flow of the fluids in the xylem and the phloem.
And that is another aspect that this kind of small elements in religion can go. And then when he is talking in the Royal Society, he told that this truth was known by my ancestors 3,000 years ago. And only to him who understands this truth that the reality belongs. So that is the greater religion
Aspect
that
of
comes
it.
in.
This really culminates because in Jagdish Chandra Bose and the way you narrate it is a good example to say that he is going against a popular belief that the tree is venerating the god, yet at the same time sticking to his spiritual civilizational ethos, saying, I am capable of harboring both the thoughts.
Yes.
So on that note, I really thank you
Thank
for
you
your
so much.
time
It was a
and
great
thank the
conversation.
opportunity.
Thank you.